Hi there. Hi. So my name's David Johnson. I'm so pleased to be here, and thank you so much, Kyle, for inviting me over here. And it's so good to be here with Kyle and Florian, who I know of old. And thank you, Daniel, for that last wonderful talk. And so many common elements in what you said, Daniel, with what I want to talk about. So, particularly the concept or the idea of the sensorium, the integrated sensorium, which I think is at the basis of what you're saying with the way that echolocation can work through hearing into other senses in the brain. So my interest is through the process of art making. I'm an artist. I unashamedly identify as a blind artist rather than an artist who is blind. I make that distinction because I use blindness in my art rather than trying to sort of circumnavigate blindness and get around the social barriers and constructs that have been mentioned already. Rather than trying to do that, I use the positive, generative aspects of blindness to create my art. So today I'm just going to use my PhD thesis, which I'm just coming to the end of a 7-year part-time PhD project at the Royal College of Art in London, where I've been looking at what I call blind aesthetics. That is the title of my thesis. And can I ask you to put the first slide up, please, Florian? Yeah. And there should be an audio with it.
Yes. Sorry, give me a second, please.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
I've attached an audio to my slides.
The screen shows the title of the thesis, Blind Aesthetics, Art as the Currency of Radical Vision.
So, as you can hear or see, my thesis is in 2 parts, blind aesthetics and art as the currency of radical vision. Blind aesthetics, that phrase refers to the idea of living in the world as a blind person. It is the experience of being in the world in the world that we're born into. And of course, that world is a world that is constructed around us. There's a context, there's always a socially constructed context to the world that we live in. My research is focusing on the relationship between the blind body and the socially constructed world or cultural context. So the other half of the title, art as the currency of radical vision. So this clearly refers to my art practice. So my art practice has developed over many years. I'm a man in my mid-60s, and I've been an artist for many years, although I did have a kind of break from art in my 20s and early 30s. As a child and as a teenager, I always did art. I had sight then, and I have had a condition known as retinitis pigmentosa, which I'm sure some of you here know about that condition, which is a progressive retinal dystrophy, which slowly the retina deteriorates and your sight gradually goes away. So as a child, it wasn't very apparent. I had fairly good vision and a fairly, as it were, normal child life. And art, drawing and painting was a very big part of my life at that stage. And I went to art school for a year, after I left school in my late teens, whereupon my eyesight was starting to get worse and my painting and seeing skills were diminishing, and I thought at that stage, art is not for me. And I swapped horses to doing music. Anyway, to cut a long story short, in my mid-30s, I lost my sight completely, and ironically, at that stage, I resumed my art interest and started going to art workshops, art-making workshops and stuff, and realizing that I could still do art, and it was in fact something that was just as exciting, but in a different way. My art practice that I've developed over the last 30 years consists of a diverse range of materials and processes. The materials include concrete, clay, plaster, artificial rubber, sound, and found objects. And the practices, or the processes rather, that I use include casting and molding, sound recording, 3D printing is something I've been doing a lot of recently, and the assembling of found objects in weird and wonderful and extraordinary ways to express the life of blindness. So the next thing I just want to briefly talk about is the research questions that I've been using over the last period of research. And these questions are on the next slide, please, Florian, with the sound, if you could. Yeah.
The screen shows the research questions. To what extent and in what ways might art made by a blind person contribute to a new epistemological paradigm around vision? To what extent and in what ways might this new paradigm impact on the lives of both the visually impaired and wider communities?
So these two questions are the questions that have guided me through my research, and those in turn have been guided by my methods and my methodological approaches. The main methodological tool that I've used in my research is that of simply being blind in the world, as I mentioned earlier. It is simply being in the world with a blind body. And that has been the main overarching background sort of methodological tool that I've used. I've also used some more conventional methods in my research, those being particularly critical disability studies, being particularly influenced by people like writers such as Georgina Klieg from California and Hannah Thompson in the UK and David Bolt up in Liverpool. And the other methods that I've used include philosophical phenomenology, being guided by writers such as Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Martin Heidegger and Jacques Derrida in particular. So the next thing I want to talk about is a brief overview of the thesis structure that I've used. So if I could, not yet, no new slides yet. So my thesis consists of 4 thematic chapters and 1 quite extended introductory part. And the introduction is quite important if you ever get a chance to read it. And they say only 8 people ever read your PhD thesis, but the introduction to my thesis includes an account of the journey that I have personally made with retinitis pigmentosa, and it's quite important to understand the details of that because it describes the complexity of that particular eye disease. And complexity, as you'll hear in a minute, is a very important part of my research, methods, I guess. So the first thematic chapter is called anamnesis. Now, anamnesis is an ancient concept which was described by people like Plato and some of the other Socratic philosophers. Anamnesis talks about the embodied knowledge. It's the idea that we are born with certain knowledges and certain understandings of the world that we're born into. We are of the world, and importantly, we are born ready to walk, we are born ready to talk, ready to hear and to taste and to speak, and importantly for this thesis, ready to see. Whether or not we can see, of course, is another matter. Disability or disease may take those faculties away. That doesn't take away from the fact that we are still predisposed, predestined, predetermined to do these things, a vital part of my research argument. The second of the thematic chapters deals with three important concepts that run through my research. These are currency, attunement, and the comma. And I'm just going to briefly talk about these in turn. And I call these apexes of thought. They're kind of clustering of ideas around these themes. Currency. Currency is the sort of overarching background phenomena that joins everything together in a fluid, flowing continuity. It's importantly embodies ideas of complexity and the heterogeneity. And it is here that I describe try to describe the complexity that is inherent in disability, and in particular in blindness. And any attempt to reduce disability or blindness to a simple set of fundamental essences loses something very important in the truth value of what it is, what it means to be disabled. The second of the three concepts that I deal with in this chapter is that of attunement, and this is a kind of relational concept where things are joined together in a resonant connectivity. There's a kind of throbbing relationship between entities that I illustrate with my artworks, and I also draw, as I said earlier, on the writings of people like Martin Heidegger and Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who writes about attunement. I use those writers to try and demonstrate attunement and the importance of it. And finally, the comma. The comma, again, is a relational concept. It's the relationship between two or more objects or entities. The comma, as in language, both joins things and separates things simultaneously. So it's a very important concept. And I use Braille to demonstrate the idea of the comma, because Braille, as I'm sure you're aware, is a tactile language, and it is usually instantiated in paper that has been embossed, where the Braille bumps emerge from the background paper. They are part of the paper. So there's a comma relationship between the Braille dot and the background paper. They're one and the same thing, but they're distinct from each other as well. That's the idea of the comma. The third chapter is called Grunts and Squeals. This talks about the spoken word and its relationship to the mental image. This is, I think, quite relevant to what Daniel was saying earlier about the relationship between sound and image, visual image. In this chapter, I talk a lot about the process of audio description, of which I'm a very active user of audio description in museums and galleries. I go to many audio description events, and in these events, I, and I think many other people, experience visual imaging very powerfully, and it is in art and cultural objects that I've experienced most strongly, most vividly visual images, yeah. And in this in this chapter, I touch on an area which I hope to expand after I finish my work in visual imaging, where I talk about the diversity and, again, the complexity of the visual image and the phenomenon of aphantasia, which is where, if you haven't heard of it, it's where people experience, they don't experience visual images at all. And this has got nothing to do, clearly nothing to do with the health or otherwise of your eyes. Many people, or a large minority of people, experience or have aphantasia, even though their eyesight might be perfectly healthy. And I'm working with a guy called Kevin Hunt from Nottingham University, who's a visually healthy man, but an artist himself, and he identifies as aphantasic. I, on the other hand, I've got no vision whatsoever, and I seem to have very vivid and abundant visual experiences and a very abundant visual life, and internal visual life, which is constantly being stimulated in various ways through my integrated sensorium. So the last of the thematic chapters in my thesis is called With the Experience of Blindness, ellipsis, blind aesthetics. And in this chapter, I simply list or catalogue the most dramatic and ubiquitous experiences as a blind person in the world, just living in the world, a normal life. And here I list and describe some of the more common experiences of touch and sound, and how, for instance, sound is no longer, with blindness, so fixed to the front-facing direction or perspective. It seems to be much more of a panoramic 360-degree experience with blindness. So that's one of the areas that I look at. And touch, again, is something that I talk about in this chapter, where I describe how touch becomes increasingly a sort of durational, momentary experience. And in this chapter, I've used my artworks to try and demonstrate these phenomena and these particular experiences that you get with these faculties through blindness. So today I have brought some of my artworks with me. I haven't, unfortunately, had a chance to get them out of my bag yet, but I hope to find somewhere to put them on a table later, and maybe you'll be able to come along and touch them. There's just a few of my tactile pieces, which I'm happy to sort of talk through if I meet you later. So just to move on I've missed out one of my slides, I think, but yeah, let's just backpedal a little bit. I was talking earlier about attunement. If I could ask Florian to just put up the third slide. Apologies for my mistake. This has got a bit of audio with it.
The screen shows.
Yeah.
The screen shows the installation Sanctuary Cafe in the shopping mall in Lewisham, London. Okay.
So, for those of you who can't see the screen, this shows a large artwork. It's basically a sculpture, although I think of it more as an installation than a sculpture. And it is a woman, adult woman, who is sitting at a table, a life-size woman sitting at a life-size table, and she is depicted drinking a cup of coffee and eating, and she's also gesturing with one of her hands as if she's in conversation with other people that are sitting at the table. The table is designed to accommodate visitors, so people can come along and just sit with the woman. Her name is Stella, and she's a locally well-known, local to Lewisham in South London, a community worker who lots of people know, so lots of people sit down with her, and they talk to her, and they talk to their friends, and the idea of the sculpture is that people can engage directly with the sculpture rather than it being up on a plinth, out of reach and beyond the touch and engagement of visitors. This is a 3D print object. It was made out of 51 different parts because the 3D printer couldn't manage to print more than a fairly small lump of stuff. So she's made out of 51 different parts. And it's supposed to represent the idea of attunement that I was talking about earlier. Both the attunement between the 51 parts, the attunement between myself and my collaborators that helped me make this object, and also the attunement between the visitors and the sculpture itself. Sorry about that diversion back to the earlier chapter. So now I just want to talk a little bit about the about the original contribution and the importance that I think my research brings to the field of disability studies and to contemporary art. So I can, the importance of my research can be split into three parts: the nature of disability and blindness, the situating of disability and blindness, and what I call the supercrip trope of disability. So just to deal with those one at a time. So the nature of disability. My work talks about what it is, what disability and blindness really is. And it is this idea of complexity and the irreducibility of disability. As I said earlier, any attempt to reduce disability to a simple set of essences, to fundamental, simplistic ideas, is really a very problematic thing to do and something that should be avoided at all costs. Disability and blindness is inherently complex. It's inherently heterogeneous. You cannot simplify it. The situating of disability is the other way in which I think my research says something new or adds to some important contemporary writers. And I argue that disability and disability in general is ubiquitous. We all encounter disability at some stage in our lives, whether it's in infancy. As humans, human infants are very disabled until the age of about 5, when they become a little more self-sufficient. Or whether it is in dotage, if we're lucky enough to reach our dotage, disability inevitably visits us in that phase of our lives. So disability is not it's not a marginalized, odd, extraordinary thing. It is part of all our lives. Finally, the idea of the supercrip trope, which is linked to what I've said before. It is the idea of giving blind people or disabled people special powers or special abilities or functions which, extraordinary faculties. It does a great disservice to disabled people and blind people to give them those special powers, I believe. The Crip theory calls it the supercrip trope. So, and I argue in my research that that does a great disservice to people, and disabled people are just trying to live a normal life and get on with an ordinary life in a very extraordinary way. So stereotyping and caricaturing disability does a great disservice to that process of just getting on with a normal life. And that's not to say that Daniel's talk earlier about, our blind people's abilities to use our faculties in a special way through maybe echolocation or heightened tactility, a sense of tactility. That's not to say that disability and blindness doesn't give us that, but it doesn't mean that we are somehow extraordinary people. Stevie Wonder is a wonderful musician, and I think he'd have been a wonderful musician anyway, regardless of whether he's blind or not. So I'm happy to talk to people about that afterwards if you want to engage. It's quite a controversial area. So, and the final slide I'd like to share with you is about to be shown by Florian. This is before you show it.
The
Florian.
screen shows
Sorry,
the installation Too Big to Fill at the Royal Holloway College, London.
Okay, this piece, for those of you who can't see, consists of a series, I think there were 18 in the end, large concrete domes, and each dome is about 1 metre in diameter, and each dome represents a braille dot, a braille bump. And the domes, the concrete domes, are laid out in a row and spell out 2 words. The 2 words are seeing red. And the point of the piece is that the braille is far too big to feel. People who can read braille wouldn't be able to read it because it's too big, and sighted people who read braille probably wouldn't be able to understand it either. It's really about inaccessibility. It's a sort of ironic piece that expresses, I suppose, the anger and frustration at how much is inaccessible unnecessarily in the world. And I showed this piece at a conference in 2015 called Blind Creations, at which Florian was present. And I believe that was the birthplace of a collaborative process that you and I went through.
It was, yeah.
Over the subsequent years. Did you want to say anything about that, Florian?
I will show some slides in my presentation.
You're going to, okay, cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, okay, well, you'll hear more about that later. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about my research, and thank you for listening.